Hi, everybody. Welcome to Soul Contracts Corner. I now have a name for this series where we're continuing the conversations from Let's Talk Vibes. I'm your host, Lauren Joy Rose, and today I am joined by fellow soul contract practitioner, Robyn Dennis. Hi, Robyn.
Hi, Lauren, I'm so happy to be seeing you again.
Yes. Well, we met, of course, when you had your level 2 soul contracts training last year in the summer of 2024. But talk to me a little bit about your journey. How did you end up even discovering and learning about soul contracts?
Well, a good friend of mine who at that time I didn't even know her, she was a soul contracts practitioner in Shreveport, Louisiana. She I happened upon her front porch, my husband and I, and it went from a knock at the door to us becoming really good friends and her introducing us to Nicholas's work and Almira's work. And from that, I joined this podcast with Nicholas and he read my mail and I couldn't believe it. In the podcast, the one that's free, where you're just finding out about it. And I was
Yep.
like, how is it possible that I felt so seen and understood? And what it did for me became contagious. I was like, if those are my energies and I'm now understanding myself at this deeper level, it's a gift I want to give to other people to better understand their self and their energies through the work. So that led me to what I experience now as not just a practitioner, but what I would say is the only soul contracts therapist that there is.
We'll talk about that, this soul contract therapy, this sort of modality that you're now pioneering.
Yes. So um, once upon a time in my past, I was a traditional therapist. And I did a lot of group therapy. Walked people through things that are very difficult, like grief, understanding sexuality, themselves as sexual beings, and how that's influenced their life, and a lot of family and marriage therapy. So I was always dealing with people who were having conflicts in relationships and wanting to understand them from marriage therapy and beyond. Well, once I was a marriage therapist that got a divorce, it was so odd. And I was like, okay, this is weird. And I kind of stepped away from the work of traditional therapy. But the main thing that I noticed is people were using me as a sounding board. Things weren't getting resolved. And it was really just like the meeting with me to have a session. And then they really didn't get a spiritual perspective. And they're like, okay, see you next week. And that
Mm.
became burdensome for me. It didn't feel like I was being effective, but the feedback was that it was extremely effective. They were addicted to talking to me, but they weren't addicted to fixing their life and actually
Mm.
seeing something get better as a result of therapy. So once I went through soul contracts and began being a practitioner, I saw how transformative it was. It was exactly what I was looking for when I was a therapist. So I was like, you know what? When I first got into this business, I researched those energies up, down, left, and right. I discovered the personality behind the numbers. And then I realized if I can know these numbers so intimately well and how these personalities flow through these numbers, I could do the same thing in a therapy format. And so I would begin to put contracts together and I would be able to see, oh, this is how the personality of this energy moves. This would be a perspective of someone carrying that energy. And when I started putting them together, I researched for like 2 years before I stepped into soul contract therapy because I started getting really good at it and really good at being able to tell someone else's perspective when they weren't in the room. And that's how soul contracts therapy was pioneered. It became after a person has a session to understand their own energy, then I was able to bring someone else in the room, maybe the parent that passed away where they never felt resolved about that dynamic or the interaction, maybe a child that passed away, or maybe a divorce that occurred and they really needed some closure. And that's when those sessions were born. And that's how I work with the energy. And I absolutely love it.
That is so beautiful. And honestly, hearing you talk about it completely reminded me of something I'd forgotten about, which was like way back at the beginning of my awakening, thinking that like the ability to have therapy with someone who has passed on would be so beautiful because especially learning how we really, when we die and have this physical death, it's like the ultimate ego death. Like our ego does not continue with us back into soul form. And so I thought it would be beautiful because maybe in life that person would never have been willing to come to this session because their ego would not have permitted it. But now they can come and give the perspective of, hey, this is what was going on for me. And also, as a soul, I can tell you all those things you ever wanted to hear from me in life because I do genuinely mean it. My ego
Yeah,
just would never have let me say those things to you.
that's so true. And you just captured the magic of soul contracts therapy. That's exactly what it feels like every time I'm able to bring in a contract of someone that they need resolve with. It feels so good to watch them heal those wounds, to watch them say,
Mhm.
"Oh, I never knew that they carried that or that they felt that way." I mean, it's brilliant. I love it.
I'm curious, actually, like, have you ever even considered bringing in really that mediumship ability to kind of bring that soul into the conversation, into that therapy session? Is that something you think that you might be interested in the future or you're trying
I
to do
do
now?
it now,
You
Lauren.
are.
So
Okay.
interesting that you say that. I carry such high spiritual energies in my own soul contract. And I've always operated in that way very fluidly, but I didn't always tell the client. So
Mm.
soul contracts therapy allows me to bring my conventional training and my spiritual training together. So they know that if they're sitting with me, a lot of it is going to be intuitive. I've had parents where I don't allow the person to tell me anything, and that's what keeps the integrity of the work. So don't tell me, like, even if you tell me that the person passed away, I don't want to know what dynamic you shared before you get into the session so that it stays very pure. So a lot of times I've had where the person that's passed on, they come through and they share a message, and I'm like, I don't even know what this means, but the person knows exactly what it means. And I've had some really transformative sessions because of that, just staying in the purity of the intuition, and that I'm able to go in and just feel the energy and feel what comes through. And it's magic. It's absolute magic.
That sounds so wonderful and like such a beautiful experience. And I just think about so many people who would benefit from that, because again, we want this closure and they feel like they're kind of having to find it on their own because they know they're
Yeah,
going to never get it from that person. And this can really allow them to get that closure, which is what so many of us are craving in our own journeys.
that's so true. I'm so glad that you mentioned our own journey, Lauren, because if I can start with what this did for me, as a person that carries 10, 1 in the middle, and a person that carries fives, for me, I needed closure about my relationship with my dad because through
Mm,
soul contracts, I end up finding out something very detrimental as far as having a different dad than the one that raised me and not being
mm,
aware of that and needing to heal through that. And being able to bring in their contracts and understand the relationship, it was healing for me to
mm,
be able to understand that I set that dynamic up and what that was. But the main thing is I stopped being a victim. And I
mhm.
realized that in soul contracts therapy, some of the most powerful breakthroughs come from them being able to just focus on themselves and not look through the lens of I was a victim and this thing happened to me. And so the reason that I continue to have session upon session is because my goal is to get them there, where they're able to own it and own that experience and have reverence for that experience without continuing to feel like something wrong was done to them. So that's kind
Yeah.
of the big catalyst that comes from this type of therapy. I'm able to launch them into taking responsibility for their own life and their experiences. And it doesn't,
Beautiful.
I get a lot of people who've experienced a lot of abuse,
Mhm.
a lot of rejection, and a lot of abandonment. And being able to look at those experiences and have a completely different perspective is the most healing thing I've ever experienced personally, and being able to give it back as a therapist.
That is so beautiful. And also, I'm so glad that you did bring in your soul contract numbers. Now, I happen to know that you had fives in your chart. So I wasn't surprised as you were talking. I was like, oh, that's that five energy. But then I was also thinking, I'm like, well, what other energies might there be? And like, yes, five can have mediumship abilities. But I was even kind of thinking, I was like, 10-1 or 9-9. And so then you mentioned the
I have
10-1. I'm
all of
like,
them.
oh, you have them all.
I have them all. I
There you
have
go.
I have double fives in karma. That's the only karma. And then my talents are 9, 9, and 18, 9. So they show up big time for
Yeah.
me.
Oh my
Yeah.
goodness, you have that strong mediumship ability, clearly. And also then when you talk about, the life that the experience you've had, the fives can experience that abuse in order to overcome it. And same so famously with the nines that are so much about disempowerment, the 10-1, and then specifically that father abandonment. So like we're seeing how all of this has shown up in your life. Now, considering you have been in the role of the therapist, and that's so often associated with the twos, do you have a 20-2 or an 11-2? And I kind of think maybe you have a 20-2. Do you have that
In
by
my
chance?
So it's funny. I didn't pick that up until I changed my name and pick up the 20-2, but I'm 11-2
Okay.
on my common name chart. So it's 11-2 in the middle. And it definitely explains so much of how my life has panned out. Like I'm surrounded by 11-2s. It's my center for my common name from birth.
Well, the reason I was thinking maybe you would have the 20-2 is because I heard you talking in another interview a little bit more about your upbringing and coming from a very Christian and religious background, and then leaving that in order to explore spirituality. So when that happens, that what gives me the tendency sometimes to be like, is there a 20-2? And even though you really only picked it up in your chart in the married name, of course, the first letter of your name is R, which is going to be that 20. So it's right there with you since birth. Now that I think about it, of course.
Very true, very true. So though it didn't lay out in the chart, it's definitely in the R,
Yep.
100%.
That energy has always been with you. And yeah, and like, I mean, just looking again at what you're doing, I just love how much we all embody our charts and how these energies can manifest in different ways. But you really are pioneering something new, right? That five pioneering spirit. But you're also really building a structure, right? That 11-2 coming in as well. What other energies do you maybe see in your chart that are contributing not only to this soul contract therapy, but just in your life now?
Well, I have 8 at the top, and I have changed my name a couple of times through life, all through marriage and
Non-committal.
divorce. Yes. And so when I had that 8, I noticed that every time I have changed my name, the 19-1 and the 8 is always following me. So 19-1 just holding
Oh,
space for people and 8. But what is interesting is I have always been a one-on-one person in isolation. And every time I changed my name, the chart was always saying, you got to come out of that and lead groups. So
yeah.
right now, I am pioneering the first Soul Contracts group therapy cohort. And so I am stepping into being able to, well, first of all, each person that's a part of a cohort, they get the one-on-one for their own soul contract, but the cohort allows us to look at relationships. So if someone is bringing in a parent wound, or I've got a divorce and I'm having trouble letting that go, during the cohort in a group setting, we get to look at those contracts and talk about how that energy moves and they get closure together. So it's very small group, but it's that 8 in the chart that's bringing the community together and hosting these group therapy cohorts. So that's
Yeah.
just starting for the month of May, and I'm so excited about it.
Incredible. And that, of course, we know that those group sharing experiences are so key for anybody who has sevens in their chart, especially to be able to come out and be seen by that group. People, I mean, there's so many numbers that, will really benefit by being able to express themselves, but also, being seen by people expressing themselves.
Mhm.
Threes, the fives even come to
Yeah.
mind, of course, those eights as well. I mean, that's
Yeah.
incredible for
I'm
people with those
excited about
energies.
that. I'm like, this is truly my passion project because again, the fives, the hiding, a lot of times I was always very one-on-one with people, and that was where I felt safe, just the one-on-one dynamic. So for me to expand and say, you know what? I'm going to do this in a group setting and I'm going to watch everyone be able to just enjoy and feed off the energy of others in similar situations. And most importantly, they get to change their perspective and they really get to heal. And I love that part the
Yeah.
most. It isn't just talking for the sake of talking, something comes of it. The perspective of how they see themselves and how they see others, it truly changes. And it's met with this compassion and this love that really does energetically change their own vibe.
That's beautiful. I love that. I'm so excited for you, and I'm so proud of you for, taking that step for yourself as well.
Thank you so much. I'm excited and nervous. I'm gonna pull the first one out this
Natural.
month, but it'll be something that I continue as I see it actually benefiting people who get to take part in it.
Yeah. So talk to me a little bit more about your chart and the numbers that are there, how they've shown up in your life, and specifically like how you have been able to use the soul contract system to help you navigate those challenges.
Let's let's see, what energy should I talk about? Let's talk about that 18-9 energy.
Yeah.
There were so many crossroads in my life where that 18-9 being indecisive is how it would show up for me.
Hmm.
And I always felt like I would play it small. That was where I was comfortable. And there came a point where something very tragic happened in my personal life, and it backed me into a corner. And
Yeah.
I had to make a decision. And the affected gland with the 18-9, that's the esophagus. Let me just tell you, it backed me into a corner so bad. My esophagus ruptured and separated from my stomach. I had a 6-hour surgery to put them back
What?
together. I kid you not.
Oh my goodness. I mean, it is
So,
wild how these can, really manifest in the physical that way.
yes,
Wow.
and it did for me. And to the point where it was like, you're gonna have to make a decision. And the first thing, which
Hmm.
led to my divorce, I was married to a pastor. I was pastoring as well. That Christian background was a heavy echo over me being able to step into true spirituality. It did not match my upbringing. It did not match my environment. It did not match my friend group. And again, that 18-9, having to make a decision, you're going to follow spirit or not. You're going to step into the truth or not. It became where I had no other choice. I mean, sure, people have a choice, but for me, it was like, okay, I get it, I get it, I get it. I'm gonna make this step, and I did that. So that 18-9 showed up for me. I started making changes. I started embracing my spirituality, and Nicholas was a really big part of me finding the confidence to be able to do that because clearly I set this up and
Hmm.
it looks a certain kind of way and it doesn't match my environment. Now, am I going to have the courage and the boldness to embrace this? And even if it isn't welcomed by other people in my family, are you going to make that decision? So, yeah, that 18-9 has served me very well and it was painful. I will not
Yeah.
make some Pollyanna speech about how beautiful that was. That transition was one of the most painful things I've ever experienced, but it was also exactly what I
Yeah.
needed to step out of disempowerment into my own power. And I was very, very fortunate to have who is my husband now, my and before my business partner, right alongside me, experiencing his soul contract energies and his numbers in a way that helped us both step into this power and step into this
Mm.
lifestyle when that did not match either one of our upbringings and
Yeah.
our family dynamics. It was completely different. It was really kind of unheard of.
Well, I had another question and I'll have to remember to come back to it because just you bringing up your husband and you having mentioned that you have those nines in both of those talent positions. I mean, you must be so activating and catalytic to him, regardless of what's in his chart. I mean, how does that show up in your relationship?
It's so interesting. At first, it was constant bumping heads, like all the time. And he has nines in his common name. He has nines in karma. And
Hmm.
there was so much conflict in the beginning. Like it was
Hmm.
like the dragons were all the time. And
Yeah.
then so he's 13-4 in the middle. I'm 10-1 in the middle. And we started
Mm.
finding that harmonic flow the more
Yeah.
we learned about soul contracts, because he does divine healing, and the more we really, really stepped into the work, we start realizing that we were just mirroring each other. We were fighting ourselves. It wasn't
Mhm.
me against you, you against me. It was energy. And it was energy that was coming and rising to the top for us to change our mind about it and to really step into the flow of the beautiful side of the energy. So we got to work that out with one another. And It was just so interesting because he and I carried the 19-1 and 10-1 energy both in our contracts. And getting to the other side, I didn't know that we would get here. I, I promise you, I didn't. I was thinking, okay, we're going to burn this thing up and then we're going to walk away. But we have got to step into sovereignty, step into the flow. And that part has been beautiful. But again, it didn't start out that way.
Yeah. I also have that experience with my stepmom where we would have physical karma clash and spiritual karma clash. And the beginning of our relationship was so difficult and so challenging. And part of that was like, you know, partially also where I was in my life of just like not a very grounded place, just kind of having graduated college when she was sort of introduced. And
Wow.
it was a struggle. And then it felt like everything kind of went under the rug for a little bit. And I was like, yeah, we kind of have to make peace or whatever. But it wasn't like those early conflicts were truly resolved. And then the thing that's so funny is I'd always sort of said, it's just like, well, I just don't feel like I can invest in someone right now. Like if you're still here in 5 years, I'll invest then. I don't think I ever said that to her, but I kind of like said that to like family friends.
Wow.
And then
And
it
I
was
think that's honest. Yeah.
but the thing was, it was like 5 years later. This was COVID and pandemic. I'm back living in at home with them because of things that happened in the pandemic, and things were, kind of coming to the surface again, and just there being more attention. And there was just one day where, after like 6 months, it occurred to me, like, hey, remember that stuff from 5 years ago? That never actually got resolved, and we're gonna pop up now. And
Wow.
things really came to a head and they blew up. But it was sort of in that moment that it was like people would be asking me, like, what are you wanting? And I'd be like, well, I mean, it's not like I want my mom to leave her. Although, like, there was kind of this part of me, a little bit of a part of me that did, but
Yeah.
recognize that like
Yeah.
that's not the responsible take. That's not the responsible like
Yeah.
perspective. And so I was like, okay, man, like if I'm gonna keep saying, oh, of course I still want them to be together, then I need to start to mean it. And I need to work on myself to like really
Wow.
get to a place of meaning it. And like our relationship is so different. And like I was really in a lot of ways able to open up to receiving the love she was trying to give me. And with my own karmic threes and talent fours, but still maybe needing to work through some stuff. It's just like I was so close to that, to like receiving that from her. And so I was able to really open up my heart and really be like, hey, you're here. Like, you're not going anywhere. And
Wow.
later, when I saw this whole contracts, I was just like, well, no wonder. No wonder this
Yeah.
played out the way it did. But also, what a beautiful testament that you can have such a rocky start with someone and end up in such a beautiful place if you
Yes.
don't let it, if you just really choose to engage with that.
Yeah. I never would have thought for me that that would have ended in marriage and the most beautiful bond. And how beautiful to hear that story with your stepmother. But didn't it feel good when you were able to understand? I thought it was her, but it was energy. This was actually just energies clashing with one another. And that's just a beautiful story to hear. And you were backed into a corner during COVID, of course. Like, I got
Yeah.
to resolve this.
Yeah. Yeah. It's
Wow.
wild. I mean, yeah, it's honestly, it does kind of blow my mind sometimes that I'm like, oh, this is now the last 5 years of our relationship have been so beautiful. Like I could not have expected that at
Wow.
the for the first 5 years.
That's amazing. That's
Yeah.
honestly amazing. I love it.
Now I did manage to remember my other question, and so I'll come back to it. And I'm curious when you talked about, because you were talking about with the 18-9, you were saying difficulties from your life, like these challenges. I'm wondering if any of that was sort of like a sudden loss, like an 11-2 sudden loss and then rapid transformation um
So
challenges.
interesting. Um, the sudden loss was my identity.
Mm,
I had really built this strong and protective construct of how people saw me, how people related to me, and my image. So I considered the way my 11-2 showed up was as a complete identity death. And
mhm,
I had always protected my reputation. I'd always been this professional because for most of my life, for 23 years, I've been a real estate broker. And I would teach people one on one. That's a job that comes with a lot of integrity and a lot of moral compass. And so much of that death was letting go of what people will say about you and what people will think if you're not walking the line that you always have walked and you're not keeping up that image that you always have. That was death to me. And I
Mm,
lost a ton of relationships, which
mm,
classically happens with a 10-1. And it just, it was like I didn't even recognize my life. I didn't recognize what am I if I'm not being responsible Robyn, reliable Robyn, that way that people had always seen me, and being willing to just expose who I really was. Complete death, Lauren, complete. But it was a death that led to a rebirth. And I wouldn't trade it now, but at the time it didn't feel good. It still reverbs. I can still feel the ripples sometimes. And it's funny, my name is completely different now because my birth name was Robyn with an I. So that death that I'm
mm.
speaking of, that rebirth, um, after this very intuitive session that I had with a shaman that led my husband and I to become shamans as well, it led to a complete rebirth with a different name, a different spelling. And I was reminded intuitively that time that once upon a time, my daughter, I wanted to name her Robyn Love. And that's now my name, Robyn Love Dennis. So it's just a complete turnaround, but a journey to get there for sure.
Yeah. So that name change happened before you found soul contracts or kind of after?
After.
Okay.
It was after, but the official name change, like on legal documents and
Yeah.
everything, came after soul contracts. But that experience with the shaman, I think they were the same year, probably 6 months
Okay.
apart from
They
each
were
other.
happening around the same time.
Yeah, yeah, it was very, very, very much around the same time.
Because of course, in the level two training is when we learn about the name optimization. And so,
Yep.
of course, looking at like, hey, how does changing your name change your life? I mean,
Yeah.
how would you maybe really look and say that name change and the energies of that new name have come in with your new and changing life?
Well, funny you should mention that. When I took level two, Nicholas was like, you need to change your name. I was like, Nicholas, listen, I've been married 3 times. I've changed my name enough. I am not changing my name again. And he was like, yeah, you need to change your name. And so I was able to look at the contract of my husband and with my optimized name, and it was still bringing in this lot in 1901. And I'm like, well,
Mm.
we have a spiritual business now together, and that explains a lot. So I was so fortunate to be able to just bring in the energies of Robyn Dennis and not have a conflict with my husband, and to be it brought in lots of sevens. So lots of
Mm.
magnetism that helps a person that has been in hiding, even though it's very similar to the five. But for me, once I got settled into the energy, then I start saying, well, why not? I don't mind doing a podcast. I don't mind stepping out there. But before, that would
Yeah.
have been complete terrifying to me. But now all I do is think about, yeah, we're gonna put this on stage, honey. We are proud of the work that we do. We are not hiding anymore. So I was able to see that Robyn Dennis had those energies in just the right places where I no longer
Beautiful.
felt the need to hide and to be in isolation and not have to be restricted to one-on-ones to feel
Yeah.
safe, but where I feel safe at all times, in all situations. Like I own it so much that it doesn't come with so much fear, the nines that I used to carry. It is really
Mhm.
where I'm able to step into it and own it and not feel that need to protect a reputation or to be perfect. It's like, it is what it is, honey. And
Yeah,
I
that
love it.
10-1 perfectionism.
Oh, yeah. That was where that whole protecting my reputation, protecting that I'm responsible for everybody, it was all coming from that. So being able to disentangle from that and completely change my perspective means I get to operate on the higher side of that energy. I've been able to transmute so much of that to the positive side, even the fives. It's like the other side of that energy doesn't even resonate with me anymore. I just really get to step into the purity of the energy by just living in the awareness of how it flows.
Oh, beautiful. And I mean, the integrity is clearly so important to you. Like I've heard you mention that word multiple times already. It's like, and so knowing you have that 10-1, it makes perfect sense. And then also if there's that 19-1, there's even more emphasis on that integrity piece, which
Oh
is
yeah, but let me also tell
important.
you about that 1901, honey, because
Yeah.
I am a whole nighttime comedian. in the evening.
I was gonna ask you, actually, I forgot. I'm glad you're bringing it up. I was
Okay.
like, how are you at that laughing?
Oh yeah, it is central to my being. I have so
Beautiful.
much fun, so much more fun than I did now because when I think about the energy before, because no matter how many times I change my name, I always have a 19-1. But before, it was definitely more cynical. It was
Yeah.
definitely where I appeared in front of other people to be positive, but there would always be like this voice in my head that was like, that's
The
not gonna work.
self-judgment.
That's not, oh, so much of it. But now,
Mm-hmm.
honey, it's a whole comedy show in this house every night. And I just
Oh,
love being able to step into the flow of that side of the energy because I don't take life too seriously like I did before. It's
that's
like
so
I can see
good.
that life is so fun and so funny that now my observations without the judgment, it's just I just laugh at life. It's funny.
That is exactly what that energy, right? That's
Yeah,
exactly the lesson that's with that energy, to
yeah,
learn to laugh at the world and yourself.
right. And I do a
Oh,
lot of it.
I am so glad you've tapped into that. I don't have a 19-1 in my chart, and or even in the letters of my name. It's one of the kind of like missing energies. And sometimes when I think about Lauren Joy Rose is my optimized name for now, but I know it's a stepping stone. I know that there's going to be another name coming. And a lot of times I'm like, I want that 19-1. I want that 19-1 energy. I think there's something so beautiful about it, especially that laughter piece, but the holding space. I think, the retreat center, or the kind of opening of a center, I think is certainly a possibility for me. And we'll kind of see what happens. Is that something also for yourself that you are seeing in your future at all?
Well, it's been a part of my past.
Mm,
Even though I didn't think of it that way, when I opened my real estate brokerage and when I brought in real estate agents and taught them, I was holding space for them in a physical building. And
mm-hmm.
sometimes I know with soul contracts, I have expanded so much on the work. Some of the terms are a little antiquated. And so in our 2025 existence, there's so many different ways to hold space with people and for people that even as I was mentioning the group therapy and the counseling,
Yeah,
that is all holding space for people
100%.
in
Yeah.
such a, expanded way than just I have a brick and mortar business, which I have had more than once, but I feel expanded in that 19-1 to be able to even use technology like you and I are doing today to be able to sit in space together and realize that hey, there's a wider way for that energy to show up. So I don't know that I would want to have a physical building again, but I do know that I love bringing people together, and that in the future, as soul contracts group therapy grows, that I'll be looking to have retreats and have very powerful weekends and workshops with people where they do come together. I hold space for them. My husband holds space for them. We do a lot of shaman work. So just bridging all that together, we're interested to see what that's going to look like in the future.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, for me, I'm kind of young enough where I can think, well, maybe that'll happen in 20 years, right? In terms of
Yeah,
something being like brick and mortar,
yeah,
but definitely the like more of the retreats that you hold a couple times a year or once a year, but you don't own the space. I'm like, for sure, for sure, for sure.
yeah. Yes, very smart business move, Lauren. Very smart.
But there is that part of me, that's kind of for the last few years has really daydreamed and dreamed about almost like this sort of compound, if you will. And it's like there's a place that is part of it where it's like, yeah, retreat centers and they come for a temporary retreat. But then there's also part of it where it's almost like an artist commune. And it's like, hey, if you can come for 3 to 6 months or whatnot, or like there are people that want to have like communal living and they live there like almost indefinitely, like as long as they're wanting to. And so like there is this part of me that like pictures that or had been picturing that for my future, but we'll just see what happens, because the thing I also know about myself is sometimes I need to have almost that like that lamppost, that guidepost, and that north star, but it's never actually a place you're meant to arrive. It's just what keeps you taking those steps on your journey, and then your actual destination sort of becomes discovered along the way.
I love that. I love that. And it may be less
Yeah.
than 20 years, Lauren.
Yeah, we'll see, right? We'll see what happens.
Yeah, yeah. That'll be so fun. That'll be so fun. The
Yeah.
world needs it. They really need such a measure of truth. So yeah, I can see it for you. It'll be exciting. Just sign me up.
Well, do you
Sign
have
me
any final thoughts, any final comments you'd like to share today?
Final thoughts or comments. I would say that if the audience is already familiar with soul contracts and they're familiar with the work at some level, I just love to encourage people to get to know themselves through their energy numbers and that they are one of a kind and that they embody the energy of source to carry out those energies and that everybody has something to contribute to the world. Everybody does, even if it's in their own corner of the world, in their environment. So anybody that is interested in this, get to know the personality of those numbers. So it was never meant for the numbers to control us. We actually get to control the numbers, and the more that we know about them, the more that we get to carry them out in the way that we choose. So that's my final thought for anyone that's listening.
And where can people find you and get in touch?
Well, my husband and I are in Colorado Springs, Colorado, and our business is called the Soulful Shamans. So if anyone is interested in the group therapy or the one-on-one therapy, if they just look up the Soulful Shamans, it has all the links there where they can find me.
Perfect. And we'll have that in the description as well.
Awesome.
Well, thank you so much, Robyn, for joining me. It's been great to catch up
You
with you. And I think we've had some great observations here today.
Thank you so much for having me, Lauren. Thank
My
you.
pleasure. And thank you, everybody, for watching and tuning in. Make sure to subscribe for more episodes of Soul Contracts Corner. Bye bye.
Bye bye.